Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. We've got something cool from Nvidia. So I've been fortunate enough to check out the RTX 4090, the 4080, the 4070 Ti, and now we've got the 4070. Okay, so this is when I usually say, let's get it out of the box. Well, there you go, out of the box. I think what most people are going to want to know is how the 4070 compares to the 4070 Ti. Now this is from Asus. This is not a Founders Edition card like this one is, but like I said, I think people really want to know, is it worth the extra money to get the performance boost that you get with a 4070 Ti over the performance of a 4070? Is it worth the extra money? Now I've got this 3070 Ti here. I don't have a 3070, I just have a 3070 Ti. You can see it is a longer card, and that holds true with the 4070 because the measurements on the 3070 are 242 millimeters long, which is the same as the 4070. So the old 3070 and the new 4070 are the same size. 3070 Ti is a little bigger. So that's good news if you're looking at this card and you have a small case and you really need a card that will fit. The 4070 is a bit smaller. And really I'll focus on comparing the 4070 and the 4070 Ti because it's no secret that the 4080 and the 4090 will of course beat up the 4070 pretty good as far as performance. But from a bang for the buck standpoint, that's what I want to look at because this is considerably less expensive than the 4080 and the 4090. And hiding here in the box is another small box. This is your power connector, and we'll talk about this a little later when we're ready to power the card up. So I'll just set that off to the side for now. So looking at the business end of the card here, like the 3070 Ti, the 4070 has 3 display ports and 1 HDMI port, 3 display ports and 1 HDMI port on the old 3070 Ti. Now the 4070 Ti here, we've got 1, 2, 3 display ports and 2 HDMI ports on this particular card. And while I'm comparing cards here, now like I said, I don't have a 3070 to compare, but if you look at these, you can see that, and it may be a little hard to tell, but the fan here is a little larger, and I measured it, and I believe it's around 92 millimeters on the 4070. Yeah, about 91.5, 92 millimeters. Same size on both sides of the card here. And not that anyone really cares so much, but while I'm measuring things, the fan on the 3070 is around 85 millimeters. So not sure if they're the same size on a 3070 or not. Now, of course, the custom solutions, cooling solutions, use a variety of fan designs and sizes and fin profiles. You can see it looks like Nvidia made a little bit of a change here between the fan on the 4070, at least comparing it to the 3070. You can see it's the blades are shaped a little differently. Of course, they're always trying to achieve the goal of moving the most air as possible with the least amount of noise generated. Now, if you have not seen a 4090 in person, this is a 4090 here on my test system. The 4090 and the 4080, here's the 4080 here, they are identical physically in terms of the size. The 4080 weighs just slightly less than the 4090, but to look at them, you really can't tell them apart. So this is the 4080 Founders Edition. This is a 4080 Supreme X from MSI, and it is even larger than the Founders Edition. So just to compare that to the 4070, you can see it is massive. And again, you don't really get a feel for it until you're in person and you see the differences. Not to take away from the performance of the 4070, but just to show you how much larger some of these other cards are. And that can be a problem if you have a small case. Okay, we've got some of the initial testing running here. This is the MSI combustor that stresses the GPU. We've got the 4070 on here first. We will also run the 3070 Ti as well as the 4070 Ti and sort of look at the comparison between how all three of these cards perform. I've got my Nvidia overlay here so we can sort of monitor what's going on and use this information to compare all three of these cards. Okay, now we're running the 4070 Ti. No surprises here in the performance differences. We're seeing a higher frame rate. We're seeing about the same temperature, maybe a little higher. And of course, the power usage there is considerably more. But again, no surprises here with the 4070 Ti. So next we'll go ahead and put the, let's see, that's the 4070. We'll put the 3070 Ti in there just to see what it can do. And now we're running the 3070 Ti. You can see the frame rates are much lower. Not terrible, but much lower than what we saw with the other two cards. Our power usage is right up there, close to what we saw on the 4070 Ti. Temperatures are much higher. And I'm not touching the fan speed profiles at all. These are the stock profiles, so the temperature again is a bit warmer with this card. Okay, we are back to the 4070, still running the MSI combustor. Now there's a little trick here. I can hit Alt-Z on the keyboard, bring up my Nvidia GeForce Experience, the overlay, click on the performance, and over here you can actually boost your performance a little bit. There's automatic tuning, and this little progress bar here will move along as it's doing the tuning, and it takes several minutes. But you can see the advantage I get here is 132 megahertz. So my memory clock goes up a little bit and the GPU clock goes up a little bit. Now that does not necessarily always translate into noticeable performance, but why not? So let me turn that off. And you can see the numbers here are about the same as what I was seeing before the performance tune, but that doesn't mean we won't see some benefits in gaming. Okay, so let's take a look at the sound from the card. So I've got my decibel meter here. We're roughly a meter between the decibel meter and the card. So right now, with the fans not on, we'll go ahead and look at the ambient. Looks like we're right around 40, 41 decibels. So let's go ahead and crank up the fans and see what they sound like at 100%. Okay, now let's see what the decibel meter shows. So right around 57 decibels. Let me go ahead and turn them down. Actually, let's just see what they are at 50%. Right there is 50. They should be quite a bit quieter. Yeah, they're just barely above ambient, so 43. So not too bad. Now, of course, you know, you're not going to have your card out in the open like this. You're going to have your card in a case, so it will be considerably quieter when the fans do spool up. Okay, now we're going to take a quick look at the power that this card uses. This is the Nvidia PCAT software. You can see I'm monitoring the power usage in real time, and that is done with this cool little device here. Let me zoom in a little so you can see what's going on. It's this little circuit board, and it's basically monitoring the power that is going to the card. So the power coming in goes to this little monitoring board, and then the power going out to the card. And we can look at it in real time here. So right now we're looking at voltage, and then it switches over to the wattage. So that's the real-time wattage. You can see it's not using much since we are at idle. But this allows me to look at what the card is actually using. And there's actually a special little riser down here that actually boosts the card up off of the motherboard. So Let's take a look at the graph here. So right now, again, we're at idle, so we're using, and it varies, but right around 15 watts, 12 watts, somewhere in that neighborhood. Got a little spike right here for some reason. And when we stress the card, let me bring up the software. To do that, I'll use the MSI combustor just to show you what it does here real quick. And you'll see the power usage shoot way up when we do this little benchmark. So we've got that running in the background. Let's go back to the PCAT. Okay, so you can see the scale here changed right away. And the fans just kicked on the card since we're stressing it. So here we are at idle. We're way down here at the bottom. Now we just shot up. You can see here's 200 watts. So there's 150, 200, 250. So we're right around the 200 watt level. If we look at our average, actually the maximum we show 235 watts. Of course, the average as it's calculating will come back up. Let me reset it. There we go. Okay, so yeah, we're using right around 200 watts, 203, 204. Looks like it peaked out at 222 briefly. And I just turned off the combustor so you can see we drop back down to idle levels. Now what I'll do is I will run a game simulation. I'll pull up Borderlands and run it through the benchmark, and then we'll look at the power usage. Okay, so we'll run a quick benchmark here. I've got the settings cranked all the way up. So we will go ahead and start that. And I'm curious to see how much the power usage is compared to the MSI combustors. So basically compare a synthetic benchmark to an actual game benchmark. Okay, so we'll look at the wattage here. And you can see when it comes back, yeah, it looks like a little over 200, 220. So let's look at the PCAT real quick.
Don't get between me and my gun, heretic!
Okay, so I wasn't able to get to the screen here without actually killing Borderlands 3, but you can see here we maxed out at 232 watts, and we're back down to idle here. So yeah, that kind of tells me that we're pretty close on the synthetic benchmark compared to the gaming benchmark. So the TDP for this card, the 4070 thermal design power TDP, is 200 watts. And you can see here from the synthetic testing and a real quick run through a game, we're right there at the 200 watt, maybe just a touch over. We're right there though. And something to pay attention to when you're hooking up your card and plugging in your power connector here. Here's a little locking tab. When you push this connector into the socket on the card, you will hear and feel the click when this locking tab is fully engaged. And you'll notice there's no gap along the bottom of the connector here where it plugs into the card. You don't want to see any daylight or any gap. It needs to be flush and plugged in all the way. Okay, so now I want to talk about protein folding. So this is folding at home. This is a distributive computing project which basically takes little bits of computers all over the world and uses the computing power, mainly the GPUs, to do protein folding, or basically large simulations that involve crunching a lot of numbers as part of these projects, and this data that is crunched on by your GPU is used for fighting diseases, things like that. You can go to Folding at Home and do a Google search and you can learn all about it. But right now we're going to look at what the 4070 can do. And when you fire up the Folding at Home program, you get a screen that basically shows you what projects you're working on. And this particular GPU, the 4070, is now working on a project that is worth 486,000 points. At that rate, I'm getting about 5.3 million points per day. The other day I saw around 7.5 million. It varies from project to project, day to day. You might see higher than 7.5 million. You might see lower than 5 million. Just depends. Like I said, it varies quite a bit. But the points aren't really worth anything. You don't cash them in for any monetary value, but you do get the satisfaction of knowing that you're using your system to help fight diseases. And one thing I've noticed with folding and the 40 series graphics cards, the 4080, 4090 really crank out some serious numbers. The highest I've seen personally is on the 4090. I've gotten a little over 26 million points per day on that one. But the thing I've noticed on these, compared to the 30 series at least, these cards don't seem to get nearly as hot, which kind of tells me maybe they're not being used to their full potential. So maybe as drivers, new drivers are released, perhaps they will be able to take advantage of the horsepower that these 40 series cards can crank out. So when we look at the power that's being used right now by this particular card, again, this one will max out a little over 200, and we're in the, looks like 145, 150 range. So we're not using the full potential of the card. Okay, so looking at the benchmarks here, we've got our synthetic benchmarks at the top. I've got some gaming benchmarks at the bottom. Your synthetic benchmarks are good for sort of looking at the performance and comparing it between the cards. Your gaming performance, there's a lot of variation, a lot of variability, depending on the settings, how you've got the settings, what you have enabled and disabled, the monitor you're using, things of that nature will have a big effect on the gaming performance. Plus, the cards don't necessarily scale the same from game to game. Some games will see a bigger boost from a particular card than other games will. So looking at the synthetic benchmarks, we've got Blender, I use 3D Mark, VR Mark, V-Ray, Octane Bench, and then we've got the games Borderlands 3, F122, and Cyberpunk 2077. So you would expect the 4070 to sort of perform in between the 4070 Ti and the 3070 Ti. And again, you would sort of expect it to favor more toward the 4070 Ti in terms of performance when compared to the 3070 Ti. And that's pretty much what we see. When we look at Blender, you can see here we're a little closer to the 4070 Ti in performance. So we've got 3054 compared to 3740, where the 3070 Ti comes in at 1800. On Junk Shop, we've got 1168. Here we've got 1422. It's actually not much higher than the 3070 Ti, and we are a little closer again to the 4070 Ti. Same thing with Classroom. We've got 1021, 1507, and 1883. The average, again, we've got 3990, 5983, and 7343. Again, we're kind of in between the two other cards. Now 3D Mark, there was something a little strange here, and I don't know why, but one of the tests that you do, you run with DLSS on and DLSS off, and I would have expected this to perform, again, sort of in between, and it kind of does here with DLSS on. We got 52.76, and of course the Nvidia 3070 Ti, we can only run DLSS 2 instead of DLSS 3. But we've got 60 on the 4070, and we've got 117 on the 4070 Ti. When the DLSS is off, you can see we went all the way down to 3.14 frames per second, which is horrible. And I reran this test several times. I looked at the settings to make sure that I didn't have something enabled or disabled, and I didn't, and I kept getting the same number. So I'm not real sure what's going on here, but who's going to really run this with DLSS off for the most part? And again, this is just a synthetic benchmark. I didn't see this issue show up with any of the gaming benchmarks that I ran or in any of the other testing that I did. And that was really the only anomaly that I saw. We come down here to 3D Mark and we look at the other standard tests. There's Port Royal, Time Spy Extreme, and the DirectX ray tracing, and you can see that we've got, again, we're kind of falling in between the 3070 Ti and the 4070 Ti. In terms of performance, VR Mark, we got the orange room, cyan room, and the blue room. I was a little surprised here. It did perform a little lower, and I ran this test a couple of times. on the 4070 compared to the 3070 Ti. It's close, but I would have expected it to be sort of in between, but it's actually a little lower. Cyan room, again, all of these numbers are the same, so it doesn't look like the 40 series really has much of an effect there. The blue room, again, we sort of scaled up where the 4070 is in between again. V-Ray GPU RTX, again, we're in the middle, favoring a little higher there toward the 4070 Ti. Borderlands 3, our frame rates, again, we went from 71 on the 3070 Ti to 82. Not a huge jump, but it is noticeable, versus 102 on the 4070 Ti. The average frame time also gets lower, so you want a lower number here as you move up, and that's what we see. So the 3070 Ti is 14.02 versus 12 versus 9, and we keep getting lower as we move up on the card hierarchy. F22, we've got DLSS on and off. I ran it both ways. Now, I could not enable it on the 3070 Ti, so starting with the 4070, moving on through the rest of the cards, I'm able to do that. So we can see again, we've got the higher performance here on the higher end cards, but 73 frames per second is not horrible. Not as good as 128 or 289, but still not terrible. And then when we turn it off, you can see it takes a serious nosedive down. You know, you got 50 frames a second there, and that's, you're getting to the point where it's not real playable at that rate. Cyberpunk 2077, we've got the DLSS on and off, and the benchmark, and we've got 85 frames a second on the 3070. We've got a little bit more, 89. That's really within the margin of error. We go to the 4070 Ti and we go all the way up to 132. So for Cyberpunk 2077, I'm showing a significant gain by going to the 4070 Ti. And when you have DLSS off, of course, the frame rates go straight into the toilet. And when I run any of my gaming benchmarks, I crank all the settings up to the maximum levels, and I keep those settings the same each time I run the benchmark on each card. So here's some of the basic specs, and again, the 4070 sort of falls in between the 3070 Ti and the 4070 Ti. And what I notice here is we've got double the transistors over the 3070 Ti. Everything else, of course, you would expect it to be higher. We've got more memory, and the pricing, again, is what most people are going to be asking about. So this is at $599 is the retail price of the 4070. We're a couple $100, $250 below the 4070 Ti, so you have to really make that determination. Is the additional performance you get from the 4070 Ti worth the additional money? And of course, you know, your pricing is going to vary as soon as we come out with the cards from all your different manufacturers. Right now, all I've seen is the Founders Edition card directly from Nvidia, but we'll certainly see numbers change when these cards come out. So the 40 series graphics cards have a ton of technology in them. If you're not familiar with it, Nvidia really has it laid out and explains it very well. So basically, what we have now is hardware that can finally keep up with the software and the algorithms that are basically, you know, you've got your third generation RT cores, you've got your fourth generation tensor cores, and we've got the next generation in microprocessing. So what we're able to do now is essentially, with the algorithms, with the software, is anticipate what the pixels are going to be doing or doing next. So when we have that knowledge, we can go ahead and start to generate frames sort of ahead of time. And of course, when you're gaming, it's all about time. And now as we have a relationship between hardware and software, AI, that complement each other, the list of games that support this technology, that support DLSS, is growing. So you can check that out here on the Nvidia website. They'll show you the games that are affected, and again, this list is always changing, always growing. Sort of makes you wonder what's next on the horizon for the next series of graphics cards. So The performance of the 4080 and the 4090 is amazing, but of course there's a price that goes along with that. So now we have the 4070 Ti that is out there, and it's considerably less expensive than the 4080 and the 4090. But now we have another option. The 4070 gives you another launching point, particularly if you're considering an upgrade. If you've got an old 1080 or even a 2070, 2080, or even into the 30 series, and you're looking to make that jump, you know, this is a lot more affordable to get into the 40 series. And you will get a decent amount of the 40 series performance using all that great new technology from Nvidia. And like I said, it's a good starting point for somebody who doesn't want to break the bank. You don't have to sell a kidney to get one of these. And it's time for a quick system build. This is the Height Y60. You can check out the link for the review on this case. This is a nice little case. It comes from the factory with a vertical GPU mount. So the little 4070 looks right at home in there. And I forgot to point this out earlier. This is the connector, the power connector that comes with the card. It splits off into two. And again, you want to make sure it's connected or fully seated. Make sure your connections are fully seated here too. And in a case like this, now I have the glass out because there's so much glare, it's hard to see what's going on. But in a case like this, especially with a vertical GPU mount, you need to make sure you've got enough clearance between the glass and the side of the card. With the 4070 series here, this card is small enough and the offset is deep enough that you're not going to starve the fans here for fresh air. So that's an important consideration. And we do have some fans in the bottom of the case, pulling air in from the bottom and pushing it up to the card. Now the 4080 and the 4090, I put them in here when I reviewed the case, and I mean they're right up against the glass. There's just barely enough room to get any air in there, but this card would be perfect for this case. So we're getting more performance while using less power. That equates to a more efficient card. It's certainly affordable, so I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.